you. So first of all, thank you all for coming tonight. This is part 3 of our 4-part Tug Hill Winter Wildlife webinar series, and we're very glad to have you all. And like I said, this webinar is going to be recorded and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel, on our website. It's linked to our YouTube channel afterwards. And you can also find other webinars that we've done and the first 2 webinars of this series linked on there as well. Part 4 will be coming soon. The topic is TBD, but stay tuned. You'll receive information about that with a follow-up email with the recording to this webinar also. Please use the chat function throughout. You are muted, but you can put any questions that you have in the chat and we'll get to them either throughout the presentation or definitely at the end. And we're hoping for a lot of good conversations. We should have time at the end for all of your questions. And we have a couple of very interactive guests here today that are looking for some good questions. You may have heard my spiel about the Tug Hill Commission already if you tuned in for one of our first 2 webinars, but to quickly mention, the Tug Hill Commission is sponsoring this series, and if you aren't familiar, it's a small non-regulatory state agency charged with helping local governments and citizens shape the future of the Tug Hill region. And the purpose of this webinar series is to get people that might not think about the wildlife and outdoors of Tug Hill a little more familiar and hopefully gain a little bit of respect and knowledge about all of the wildlife that calls Tug Hill home. So without further ado, I'll introduce our 2 speakers for tonight. First off, Linda Gibbs serves as the Community Programs Director for Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust. She has many years' experience as an environmental educator, enjoys helping people connect with Tug Hill by providing fun outdoor and educational programs in support of the Land Trust Conservation Mission. We also have Irene Mazzocchi. She is a retired wildlife biologist from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. She graduated from SUNY Cortland in 1977 with a BS in biology with an environmental emphasis. After graduation, she worked across the country from Maine to Utah to Oregon, then back to Utah. She spent some time living in national parks and/or in a teepee. She returned to the East Coast to work on Cape Cod for an environmental consulting firm, then returned to New York in 1990 to start work with the New York State DEC and to get married. She worked with the New York State DEC for 31 years. She started as a wildlife technician and then became a wildlife biologist. She was the Region 6 land management representative and worked to enhance habitat for threatened and endangered species and for game species. She worked on promoting access and opportunities for the public to enjoy and to utilize the natural resources of northern New York. And she was the bird and mammal wildlife diversity team representative for the region and worked with many bird species, including black tern, piping plover, common tern, Caspian tern, golden-winged warbler, double-crested cormorant, grassland and marsh bird species. And she was also responsible for reviewing permit applications for large projects such as wind power, solar power, and/or road construction, with documenting any potential impact to threatened and endangered species. Outreach was also an important part of her job, and she worked with duck hunters, deer hunters, trappers, and promoted hunting and fishing licenses. She participated in environmental awareness days and local education on our fragile dune system along the eastern shore of Lake Ontario. She enjoys birdwatching, traveling, gardening, and recently pickleball. So with that, I will hand over the reins to Linda and Irene. And like I said, put any questions you have in the chat.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us to talk about our favorite topic, birds on Tug Hill. Again, I'm Linda Gibbs. I have Irene Mazzocchi here next to me. And this is part 3 of 4 of the wildlife series for Tug Hill Commission. Oops. Tonight we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. So first, some of you may know all of this already, but some may not. So we're going to cover where the Tug Hill region is and why it's important for birds, and why it's important to study them and keep track of them, what challenges they face, what birds and habitats are being targeted for protection and management on Tug Hill, how all of us can contribute to information about birds in this rapidly changing times, and how we can all help birds thrive into the future. So those are what we're going to cover. So first of all, where is the Tug Hill region? The Tug Hill region is a large area of about 2,100 square miles. It's located between Lake Ontario and the Adirondack Park. The southern boundary is Oneida Lake. The eastern and northern boundary is the Black River, and the western boundary is roughly Route 81. So that gives you an idea of where those boundaries are. Most of us know it's known for heavy snowfalls, not so much this year, but in past years. That wind comes across Lake Ontario and sweeps that open water up, and then as the elevation rises on Tug Hill, it dumps all that snow on us. So that's why we get a lot of called lake effect snow. The region has 41 towns and 18 villages. You can see in some of this a little bit that most of the towns, larger towns, are on the edges of the Tug Hill, and in the center is less settlement there at this point in time. The center of Tug Hill and all that snow and water that we receive filters water for drinking water supplies for a lot of important places like the city of Rome, city of Oneida. There's also a large underground aquifer on the western side of Tug Hill that gives drinking water for a ton of municipalities on that side. And there's a lot of people still on well water. So water is very important for Tug Hill. Tug Hill is the western portion of the Great Northern Forest, which goes all the way from Maine down to us on that lower left side of the screen, right here. And we acknowledge that the Tug Hill region are the ancestral lands of the Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Why is Tug Hill important for birds? Well, if you take a look at that graphic on the upper left, you can see the major migratory flyways of birds. So migrating birds are coming south with the brown lines and going north in spring with the blue lines. And you can see that right under that right-hand blue arrow flower, you can see that that's where Tug Hill is. So those birds are coming right up the Eastern Flyway, the Atlantic Flyway, right over us, and then off to find their particular habitats to breed. So we're central to the Flyway, and we contain some of the oldest forests in New York State. There are many, many places where some of which are owned by New York State as forest preserve parcels with very old forests on them. But we also have a pretty good mosaic of land cover on Tug Hill. There is that dense forest primarily, and then in between there are lots of patches of old growth stands, and then there are farmland and lakes and wetlands and streams and rivers and gulfs, or gorges, as people say. So lots of places for birds to find what they need. So why birds? Well, first, birds are colorful and entertaining. They're around us all. They move a lot. They change a lot. They're fun to follow and fun to observe. So they capture our attention. They also connect us to the larger world around us. If you're a feeder watcher, or if you're out looking for birds around you, you'll notice they move around a lot. If you follow them, you can understand that they don't need just one place. They need many different places to be, whether it's a source of water or shelter or cover, or a place to gather, as well as food sources. So they move around a lot, and we can see from where they go from our house to other places in the environment. But also birds, because they do that, are indicators of environmental health. So if there's a good abundance of birds, there's lots of birds, and there's lots of different kinds of birds, a good diversity, then we know our environment is doing pretty well. If they all look healthy and they're all living peaceably there. They depend on the same food and water resources that people do. They need lots of different habitat types for dietary and reproduction needs. So they're utilizing a lot of different resources in the habitats that we all share. So if they're healthy doing all of that, then we know that we're probably healthy too. And birds also play a very important role in pollination and in seed dispersal. So those birds like hummingbirds, sometimes orioles, sometimes scarlet tanagers that are visiting flowers for that sweet sap, sweet nectar. They're also spreading pollen as they move from trees to trees and flowers to flowers. They also eat a lot of fruits that they then spread seed from. So those are all important functions. But birds are facing challenges, right, Irene?
Yes, they are. Hi again, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Irene Mazzocchi here. So yeah, unfortunately, my first slide is a little depressing. It states that nearly 30% of the birds in the US and Canada have vanished since 1970. This is startling, but we'll see what we can do about that. The bird species, like Linda mentioned, depend on different types of habitats. If you look at this table here, you'll see that grassland bird species are the fastest declining suite of birds in North America. We're losing over 50% of our bird populations of grassland birds. Then we have shorebirds, forest birds, and tundra birds that follow. But none of these birds are doing very well. So we need to do something to enhance their habitat, to hopefully protect them and maybe increase their numbers. When I worked for the DEC, I did do a lot of grassland bird habitat management, basically did some protection and then created and enhanced grassland fields. They like big open fields. Tonight, we're going to discuss a little bit more about the forested birds. So we'll move right along into that. So Audubon New York has identified more than 45 priority forest bird species that would benefit if we managed our forests well in New York State. And with New York, with 63% forest cover, if we manage them correctly, we can influence bird populations in a positive way. So that's what we should be aiming to do. But why are birds declining? What are the threats? Habitat loss is number one. All the buildings that we have put up, housing, malls, major roads, we are taking up their habitat. And then we have all our green energy, solar, wind. That also takes up quite a bit of habitat for wildlife species and birds. Here you can see a couple of projects. Again, we're talking acres and acres of habitat. And then we have invasive species. So one of the ones that are real local to us here is the emerald ash borer. This little critter is impacting our ash trees. As far as I know, this is in every county in New York State except for 3. I believe Lewis County does not have emerald ash borer documented at this time. But I know on my property in Jefferson County, after that big windstorm, the emerald ash borer had come through, and we lost quite a bit of trees from the storm. Then you have pale swallowwort, also known as the dog strangling vine. And this plant can be found along the coast of Lake Ontario, inland and along the coast. If you ever go to Stony Point, you will definitely see this plant. It's also on all the islands that are on the eastern shore of Lake Ontario. Very hard to combat. They are trying some biological control at the moment. And with the invasive species there's a partner, DEC funds them, and it's called SLELO, St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario PRISM, Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And this is a group that is out there helping to combat our invasive species. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. And then Japanese knotweed. This looks like bamboo. It's definitely competing with a lot of our native plants. You see it growing along the stream banks and some of the roads. Looks like big bamboo plants, and just a piece of fragment of this plant can regenerate and grow a new plant. Purple loosestrife, this has been around for a while, a beautiful flower. We have put out some weevils and then some beetles to combat this plant, and it has controlled it some. So that's a little bit of a success story. And then our newest one moving in is called the spotted lanternfly. This little pest is now, it's actually beautiful, but this little pest is in Binghamton, Ithaca, Buffalo. If you see this insect, you really need to document it and get a hold of the local PRISM. Okay, this plant likes agricultural plants, likes the fruit trees, grapes, and we're really afraid of what this might do to the New York State agriculture. Apples.
And the reason these are a threat to birds is because they outcompete native plant species and other native wildlife. And so birds have to adjust. They might not have the same nutritional food that they need. So this is why it's important for birds.
Correct. Great comment, Linda. And then there's more threats.
So many more.
So many more. Botulism E is another one, and that also has to do with invasive species. Botulism E is in Lake Ontario, but under certain conditions that are anaerobic, lack of oxygen, the toxin builds up, and fish-eating birds like the common loon, long-tailed duck, when they feed on some of the zebra mussels or the gobies, it gets built up in their systems and they actually die. So invasive species are also involved with this disease. Then we have Newcastle disease, the avian bird flu, and conjunctivitis. If you see a bird species at your feeders, like that look something like this, you see crusty eyes, they don't look very healthy, please take your feeders down and disinfect them, and don't put them back up for a couple weeks. We don't need to be spreading disease among a bird species. Moldy bird seed is a real no-no, so again, keep your feeders clean and dry. Pesticides, they can hurt bird species, both direct and indirect. Sometimes they can ingest the pesticide, or, a lot of birds depend on insects, and here we are killing them all with pesticides, or some of the plant species in the berries. So you got to be thinking about it when you're using pesticides. Predation, birds are up against predation all the time. Cats, it is estimated that approximately 2.4 billion birds are killed every year in the United States from our outdoor cats. That's quite a large number of birds. Brown-headed cowbird, it's another threat. This bird, when you start to fragment some of the forest, the brown-headed cowbird might come in. What they do is they put their egg in other birds' nests and then hope that that bird will raise their young. So they don't put any energy into raising their own young. It's other birds that do that. And because their young are typically more aggressive and bigger, they get fed over the native or the nest bird's young. So they can be an issue. And of course, we have other things like raccoons that could be a predator. Collisions, with all our buildings going up and collisions, over 1 billion birds are killed each year from bird strikes on buildings. So that's another thing you want to think about. I know I used to get the question all the time about, bird feeders and birds crashing into people's windows, and I would recommend putting ribbons out on the windows or pie plates waving in the wind, and that sometimes will help. To help them not fly through, because they're just seeing a reflection and they're going to try to fly through. And then, of course, we have climate change. With the more frequent severe weather events that we've been having, this has really impacted some of our bird species. They're returning quicker and they're leaving later. So this will be a telltale. We'll see what happens in the near future, but some of the predictions are not very good for the bird species. So I just want to talk a little bit about mature forest management. And when I say mature, I mean trees that are 50 years old or older. So they're very tall trees, as you can see here. And what you want to do, the aim is to keep contiguous tracts of mature forest. Bird species can be very sensitive to fragmentation of the forest. So just like the grassland bird species, where we want 80, 100, 200 acres of grassland for the grassland bird species, the forest birds that are dependent on the forest want a minimum of 200 acres of contiguous forest for suitable breeding habitat. This is the only way that they're going to be successful. There's a really good guide out there. It's put out by Audubon. There's a link down here below. And it's called Forest Management Guide for the Birds. And if anyone has any interest in managing their property, I would look at that because it really is a great resource. So what are some of the birds that prefer the forest? What are we talking about? I'm going to try this. Hopefully you can hear this. So this species, you're typically going to hear before you see it. This is the wood thrush. The wood thrush is brown on top. The belly is white with these big, bold black spots. And I love to listen to the wood thrush in the morning when I'm sipping on coffee, or in the evening. You can often hear them. And they like the underbrush of the forest. They like the tall trees, but they like to be more in the lower canopy of the woodlands. So that is the wood thrush, and their numbers are not doing so well. This species, so brilliant, so beautiful, red with black wings and black tail, is the scarlet tanager. Also, you'll find this in woodlands. They really are sensitive to the woods being fragmented. They want that intact forest. You will see them in undisturbed tracts of forest, but you can also see them, especially during migration, in other types of habitats. But they're a beautiful, bright red bird with black wings and black tail. If you see this bird, you're going to know what you're looking at.
Usually way up high in the canopy.
Yeah, they like to be high in the canopy. Here's another woodland bird, probably tough to see, may not see them on Tug Hill. They're bluish on top. They got actually a pretty blue on top with a black necklace and streaking on the side. This is the cerulean warbler. So that's a cerulean blue, they call it. It's a brilliant blue. And this bird likes the mature forest, tall trees, but it doesn't like a lot of undergrowth. It's one of North America's most threatened migrant songbirds, and basically because of habitat loss. So keep playing. Okay. So this bird is, I call this bird the handkerchief bird. If you look at this bird, you notice on the wing, it's got a little white patch. It looks like a little handkerchief in a pocket. This is the black-throated blue warbler. Just like the name says, it's blue on top and the back, and then the throat is black, and it's got some black streaking along its side. Definitely would be able to see this species in the woods. It likes the shrubby understory, and again, I call this the handkerchief bird. Z, you know?
Z.
Yeah, and as Linda's saying, it's really, if you can, I always tell people, learn a bird a year. People don't think they can learn bird songs, but you pick up one, then you'll pick up another, and it's really a lot of fun. This magnificent little warbler, can you do that song?
No.
Is the magnolia warbler. Yellow with some black striping. Just a beautiful bird. Also, it's got the necklace also, but it's got those radiating stripes down its sides. It's a beautiful bird, and it loves the dense conifers. But again, during migration, you can see a lot of these birds. They don't typically always nest where they're migrating, obviously, but they you can see them outside of their breeding habitat at times. And then this species is, let's see if this plays. you hear that bird, that's the alarm call of the northern goshawk. This is a hawk with a white eye line, pretty robust looking, and it flies through the trees and the dense forest vegetation going after its prey. And definitely restricted mostly to the woodlands. You can see them on the outer edges at times, but this is definitely likes to be in the coniferous and mixed forest habitats.
Goshawks are also highly defensive of their nest sites, right?
Yes.
So
that's that alarm call that you hear.
yes, if you hear that, you might want to duck if you're walking in the woods.
Or look for
Or
them.
look up.
But they're pretty grayish, and they got a speckled breast. If you see the front of this bird. Just another species to look at. You see this little critter out in the woods. It's very bright yellow. It looks like it's wearing a black hoodie. This is called the hooded warbler. Also found in the woodlands. When it's flying, you can often see the outer tail feathers have a flash of white. But again, it looks like this yellow bird with a black hoodie over its head. And Tug Hill, it's the northern range of this bird's habitat, breeding habitat. Unlike most of the birds and the ones I showed you, they were all the males. Females in the birding world are typically not as colorful. This is the female hooded, very hard to tell apart from some of the other yellow warblers out there, but you can almost make out a little bit of the hood on top of this bird's head. So resources are really good to use. Record songs. There's all kinds of apps out there these days you can use, like Merlin, to record some of your bird songs and look up some of your bird species. So I'm going to move into just a little bit of the young forest management. Young forest is greater than one from 0 to 10 years old, less than 10 years old. And back in 2015, the New York DEC started the Young Forest Initiative, or YFI. And basically what they wanted to do was create some young forest habitat for some of the bird species and other wildlife species that were dependent on the young forest. Initially, what they did was they did inventory on each of our wildlife management areas. After that, they looked to see where we should do cuts and create some more young forests, basically trying to recreate what would have been a natural disturbance, like a fire or blowdown or something like that. So some of the species that were targeted for the Young Forest Initiative is the American woodcock, the golden winged warbler, the wild turkey, and the eastern whippoorwill. Now, I mentioned Tug Hill Wildlife Management Area. There is a lot of forest in the Tug Hill region and a lot of state-owned lands in the Tug Hill region, but most of it is owned or overseen by the state forest staff. When a wildlife staff oversees, or the land that they do oversee, they're called wildlife management areas, and there is only one WMA on Tug Hill, and that's the Tug Hill WMA. So this area encompasses about 5,000 acres. It consists of your hardwoods, uplands, hardwood coniferous. We have wetlands, and there's a 65-acre impoundment on the area. You get quite a bit of otter and different other wildlife that depend on wetlands on the Tug Hill. As part of the YFI program, the goal for the DEC is to create about 455 acres of young forest habitat over the next 10 years. Again, promoting American woodcock, the ruffed grouse, and the snowshoe hare. They did start cuts in 2018. The cuts were about 5 acres in size, and they will continue the cuts, as far as I know, until about 2026. And then they'll reevaluate the success of the cuts. So who likes the young forest? I mentioned some of the species, but one of the ones I wanted to show you is the woodcock. The woodcock is known for its peeping sound. You ready, Linda?
Mm-hmm.
Meh, meh, meh. if you hear that and you're driving alongside the road, you're probably seeing or hearing a woodcock. When we do woodcock surveys, that's what we listen for, is the sun setting, driving the roads and the fields. Typically, that's where they do a lot of the mating.
They
you'll
are
hear the
here
pitting.
already.
They
too.
are? You've
They have
heard
been
them?
spotted. Yep.
So
Early.
things are back early this year. So they like the densely grown deciduous tree species, so they can hide from their predators, basically. And then another bird species is the Canada warbler, not to be confused with the magnolia warbler. If you notice on this species, it's got a white eye ring, it's yellow, but it has that black necklace, but it doesn't have any streaking down its side. Also likes the woodlands, the young forest, and it does like mature forest too, though. So it likes the combination of conifers and deciduous with a shrubby understory. So keep your eyes open for some of these species you may see out there. And then there are some species that like the multiple age forests. So sort of the in-between the 10 to the 50-year-old forest trees. And this one, it's called the red-shouldered hawk. It's red on the top of the shoulders. It's red underneath, as you can see. And this one also has what they call a crescents, little triangular crescents right underneath the primaries. When it's flying, you can see these little, almost translucent, see through the wings when it's flying. So this is a hawk that you'll typically see in the woods, and they like to be near water. They like the more of the wet woodlands. Again, look for those translucent crescents near the wingtips when the hawk is flying. Maybe you'll be able to identify it. They like to hunt on mice and frogs and snakes. And this little guy is pretty mottled gray. This is your eastern whippoorwill. Also likes the forest habitat. They're pretty well camouflaged. It doesn't have that long bill like we saw in the woodcock. And they have a pretty neat call too, the eastern whippoorwill. If you hear them, you'll know what you're hearing. Hey, it's also important, whoops, I should go back one, sorry. It's also important to think about the understory management. Birds, like I said earlier, some may be in the canopy, some may be in the understory. And a lot of times in the understory, we start to get some of the invasive species again. So if you have buckthorn or barberry honeysuckle growing in and you're not getting the native plants regenerating, then it may be time to remove some of those understory plants. I know we do a lot of that, and the DEC does a lot of that to manage some of their habitats on their wildlife management areas and on their state forest lands. It really devalues the habitat when the invasives move in. And don't forget to leave room for the cavity nesters. So it's always good to leave some dead standing trees or snags. They provide locations for our nesting and our roosting. Birds, they use them for their insects, especially a lot of the woodpeckers. You know, our chickadees are cavity nesters, our woodpeckers are cavity nesters. So, and they always say to keep a range of different sizes of snags. So where you can do it safely, the rule of thumb is to retain at least 6 snags or cavity trees per acre, with 1 that's greater or equal to 18 inches DBH and 3 that are greater or equal to 12 inches DBH. So if you have the property and you're able to do that, it's really good to leave some dead trees standing. And I don't want to leave on a sad note. I kind of want to leave on a happy note. So this bird species is the pileated woodpecker. It's one of the biggest woodpeckers in North America. It actually is, besides the ivory-billed. It's nearly the size of a crow with black and white bold stripes. And the one you're looking at here is a male. If you can see right on its cheek, there's a little red patch. Female would look just like this, but it wouldn't have that red patch. So a lot of times on the woodpeckers, you're just looking for the red on the species. The males typically have red, the females don't. But this population started to recover in the 1920s when there was protection of some of our forest lands and forest regrowth. And also this bird became accustomed to be able to utilize stuff in suburbia and urban areas. So their numbers are on the increase and not on the decrease. This is another one of those species. You'll definitely see them, but you'll probably hear them first. So I'm going to play the pileated woodpecker song. That's one of my favorite birds. So I just want to, before I pass this back on to Linda, I just want to mention a couple of things about conservation efforts. DEC is continuing to fund the SLELO Prism. I just heard that they just renewed a 5-year contract. Again, this group will show a couple of slides about them in a minute. They are helping to combat the invasive species. They're doing some monitoring and some control. They're always looking for volunteers. So they do have a website, so try to look them up. On the YFI program, DEC continues to do the work with the YFI program for young forest. And I do need to put a plug in here for the Breeding Bird Atlas, the 3rd one. So every 20 years, New York State, they do what they call a Breeding Bird Atlas, and we're in our 3rd one. Goes for 5 years, and this is the last year of the 5 years. It started in 2020, and this will be the last year. And basically, the state is broken up into little blocks, and we want to document breeding birds within those blocks. If you have any interest at all in birds, I strongly recommend you get on the eBird Breeding Bird Atlas website. There's an app on your phone. If you have eBird, it's just you just need to go onto the portal for the Breeding Bird Atlas. And basically, we're looking for different behaviors that show breeding. Once we document, let's say, a robin breeding, then we don't need to keep documenting the robin breeding in that block. So just different behaviors, pairs in habitat, nests, eggs, all of that is great information. So any interest, please go on the Breeding Bird Atlas website and reach out. There's a lot of us out there that will definitely help you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Linda.
Thanks. Yeah,
We
again,
have a hand raised if you wouldn't mind taking a question.
sure.
And then we'll save the questions in the chat for the end. Ted Engel, you're unmuted if you want to ask your question. And if it was a mistake, raise hand, then we'll move on.
He does.
You see?
Yep. He's muted though.
All right, maybe it was a mistake. We'll get to the questions in the chat at the end.
Okay. And again, too, I want to reiterate emphasis on the Breeding Bird Atlas. The Tug Hill is a large area. There are a lot of blocks on Tug Hill, and there are few birders covering those blocks. So I really, if you have any interest at all, I want to encourage you to reach out and get involved with the Breeding Bird Atlas. It's great. It's fun. It's great fun to get out there and bird and contribute valuable data to the database. I just wanted to talk about, Irene covered some of the state and invasive species efforts for land conservation and bird habitat management. And Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust is a private nonprofit land trust. We operate by an independent board of directors, and we are there for landowners who want to protect their land. So we work on a voluntary basis with landowners to protect land in perpetuity. And at this point, we have 119 agreements with private landowners. We've been here for 33 years now, right? 33. 1991 was when Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust Incorporated. And over that time, we've made agreements 119 times with private landowners to protect their properties. These properties incorporate all sorts of land cover, from forest to farmland to in between. Currently have about 27,000 acres permanently protected through easements and also through ownership of land. We now own 4 properties in different locations on Tug Hill, totaling 757 acres. And we manage those for various types of wildlife and also for recreation. So we're currently, 3 of our sites are currently under development for trails being delineated and that being open to the public. So keep your eyes open for those opportunities. Some of you may have already visited the Lake Wildlife Sanctuary near Rutland, just outside of Watertown. That's our property where we held a lot of outings there. And it was previously North Country Bird Club property, and they transferred that to us in 2012. So it's a great place to go, open 365, 24/7 places to go. There's lots of things to do as a citizen and to contribute to database collection and information about birds. 2 of those things that can help you are eBird and Merlin. eBird developed as a site for birders to maintain checklists of the birds that they are seeing. And so you can make a free account on eBird. You can go birding many, many times, build a list for every site you go to. All of those entries go into an international worldwide database of bird sightings. And so that helps Cornell Lab of Ornithology and their partners kind of monitor where and when people are seeing birds and what birds and how they're doing. Merlin is a bird identification application. So Merlin has all sorts of information about birds you might be seeing. And the greatest thing about Merlin in the last couple of years is that they have a sound ID. So if you're hearing a bird in the woods and you can't find it with your binoculars and you can't identify it that way, there's actually a place on Merlin where you can record that bird and it will identify what the bird is for you. So if you're not, really conversant with bird calls, but you want to know what that bird is, Merlin is another place to check out. So I highly recommend these 2 bird apps. And of course, Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a ton of other programs to help you learn about birds. Just a few of them are mentioned here, but they have a lot more. Their site is allaboutbirds.org. They have a bird guide there that you can look up birds and learn all about them. Basically, it's an online field guide, but they also have recordings of those songs of the birds. They also have click links to be able to see live feeding stations. So you can click to the live cam in Ithaca, you can click to a live cam in Ontario, you can click to a live cam that's covering red-tailed hawks nests in different locations. So it's a really cool place to go to get all sorts of information, but also to watch a lot of different kinds of birds. I did mention North Country Bird Club. That is our local bird club, but there's also Audubon. There's lots of places where you can find information about bird clubs. Joining them is great for you and for the birds.
And tomorrow night is their meeting, 7:30, maybe?
7 o'clock, I believe, at
At
Stone
the church.
Presbyterian Church in Watertown is their March meeting tomorrow night. And another effort you can help with is the Tug Hill Bird Quest, and it's my turn for a shameless plug for my program. This is the Tug Hill Bird Quest program. It's been around for over 20 years. We've done an annual event either with competitive birding or with feeder team watching for all that time. And what we're trying to do is really create a joyful connection to the natural world for people through birding. A lot of people did start watching birds during the pandemic. It was one of the things that was really interesting during that time when we were home. So we gained a lot of new birders, and this was a great activity for them. So it's an annual bird feeder observation event. Takes place the 3rd week of May, is always our official birding week. So we have multiple years of a snapshot of birds that are visiting feeders every year. We do have an early bird sign up that took place. It's already over. Those teams receive learning emails and support materials starting in January. And then everybody else, if you just wanted to sign up to watch birds, our deadline is March 31st. So you're just before the deadline. So if you're interested in helping out, you want to make sure and visit our website and sign up. This is open to everyone, to classrooms, youth groups, families, or individuals in and near the Tug Hill region. And we provide learning resources on our website with feeding and observation tips. We provide supplies if you need them to participate in the event. Our official observation week, third week of May, for those 5 days of May. And we ask people to tally the numbers and types of birds that they're seeing, and then fill out a tally sheet that we provide and return it to us by the end of May. And then I compile those tally sheets and put an event report together every year in early June. Again, just a really good snapshot of when birds are moving. For one thing, this year will be really interesting because a lot of birds are here already and they may already be nesting by the time we do our observation. So 7 simple ways to help birds. One is to keep cats indoors. Another way is to place bells on their collars so that birds will hear them coming. Again, cats are a huge predator of birds. Make your windows safer. As Irene was saying, you can put ribbons or pie plates or decals. Closing your drapes at nighttime, making those windows less disorienting to birds at night when they're migrating is a good way to do that too. You can reduce the amount of lawn around you. Plant native plants that are food plants and shelter plants for birds and insects. Opt to use no pesticides on your lawn or in your yard or on your property, and support that by buying things that are raised organically as well. So just reducing the pesticide load in any way you can help birds. Choosing shade-grown coffee is a big one. That helps birds by their winter habitat stay good for them. So decreasing deforestation and fragmentation of forest in their wintering grounds is important too. Plastics is a huge, complicated topic, but refusing recycling plastics helps birds and humans. So if you can do that, those any kind of plastic strands that end up in birds' nests, all of that affects them the same way it affects us. That's really important. And then just watching birds and sharing what you see, taking part in the Tug Hill Bird Quest, taking part in any of the Cornell Lab programs. There's so many ways that you can help. Doing breeding bird atlas is another way. And you can also get involved. So I have to say, supporting land trusts is a good way to do that. Local land trusts are protecting land either through ownership or working with landowners in your area. These are the primary ones in central and northern New York around us. But if you are not watching us from our area, you can always go on the Land Trust Alliance site. It's our national organization. They have a Find a Land Trust feature on their website, and you can find one near you. You can volunteer with the PRISMs, as Irene said, Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. These are all the different ones. Ours is SLELO, having to do with St. Lawrence, Eastern Lake, Ontario, but they're all over New York. And they all need volunteers to help them learn about and survey for presence of invasive species and help with management. Again, joining local bird clubs and gardening clubs and learning about all that they do and helping out is really important, and planting natives is important. So again, another plug for SLELO. They do have a challenge going on. You can volunteer with them, eligible for prizes. You can have a lot of fun heading outside and looking for all those invasives and reporting them online and helping them survey so that we can prevent expansion of anything found. And they are also having a webinar coming up, Birds as Habitat Health Indicators, on May 17th. So you want to make a note of that if you'd like to join in Their website is sliloinvasives.org. And then there's lots of places to go for more information about birds on Tug Hill and elsewhere. All of those, the North Country Bird Club their page is primarily on Facebook, so you want to go there to subscribe to their newsletter. There are all the resources for the major birding resources, Merlin, eBird, and then places to go birding. Tug Hill has a huge amount of places that you can go and see different kinds of birds. You can see that through the Tug Hill Recreation Guide. Tug Hill Recreation Guide is a free publication. It's put together by the tourism organizations in our region, the Tug Hill Commission and Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust. You can see that map there that has all those orange dots, has all the sites that are covered in that rec guide and have trail maps for you to follow. So all those different places to go, and we encourage you to get out and explore. And in addition, on the right-hand side are places farther afield to go all along the eastern and I guess southern shore of Lake Ontario, and into the Finger Lakes area, all along there, lots and lots of places to go. So one benefit of us having a lot of open spaces, that there are lots of places to explore and to learn about wildlife. So that's about what we had to say. Wondering if there's any questions out there anywhere.
Did you want to show the slide with the most valuable plants for people?
We can, yes.
I thought that was interesting.
Of course, thank you for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. And then here are some types of plants and flowers that can really help birds.
Yeah, there's a really good guide out there, planting for natives, and it's put out by Onondaga Bird Club, actually, and this was some of the stuff I took from there. I gave a talk recently to a garden club, so it was, what to plant instead of plant native. So.
And we'll send any links that aren't in the slides along with the follow-up email, and these slides will be attached to the follow-up email too. And to get started with the questions, Ted Engel and Katrina Luby, you can both speak now. You should be able to unmute if you want to ask your questions, then we'll get to the questions in the chat afterwards. When you found the unmute, let us know. But in the meantime, the first question that we had back towards the beginning, Emily Fell asked, what native birds typically arrive first to Tug Hill in the spring? Have you noticed changes in their arrival over time?
Yeah. Yes and yes. My first look for is usually red-winged blackbirds.
Yes, that's the sign of spring. I'm not quite sure about Tug Hill, but definitely on the outskirts of Tug Hill. Yeah. Because people say the robin, but the American robin is here all winter. As is this year, there was a lot of eastern bluebirds throughout the winter. People were showing them at their homes in Watertown, which I was a little nervous about because they like to eat insects, but they were feeding them mealworms at their feeders, which is very expensive. But if you start, you've got to continue. So yes, birds are either not leaving or coming back sooner. But my first sign of spring is usually the red-winged blackbird, and they've been back for at least a week, which is pretty early.
Yeah, in terms of warblers, usually palm warbler. Is palm warbler first?
And yeah, black and white.
And black and white.
Black and white. Typically, I hear it sounds like a squeaky wheel. First, some of the
yeah, like a squeegee.
And then the second question you already touched on a little bit. Someone was wondering about robins and bluebirds. If they're seeing and hearing them all year, were they ever migrating birds, or has climate change allowed them to stay in the North Country all winter?
I would say that climate change has definitely changed that a bit. You could, a lot of times with birds, it depends on the opportunity of what they have to eat. So, for instance, like ospreys or deer, not deer, well, I was going to say bald eagle feeding on deer. So they're here all winter long. If there's food, open water, like for some of our duck species, they'll stay. but usually things freeze over, and we just did not see that this year.
Mhm.
And we're seeing it happen, you know, like I said, things are just happening sooner, or not happening at
Yeah.
all, so
Yeah.
they're
I was
sticking
even-
around.
I was
would
even
say.
seeing flying insects in February when I was on the warmer days when I was hiking. So I mean, there are, as long as the ground isn't frozen for robins and other ground foraging birds, or as long as there are, people feeding mealworms at feeders and there's some seed available,
Like
because we haven't
sumac,
had,
you have a lot of sumac, and the
Yeah.
birds will eat on berries or seeds.
without a lot of snow cover, there's still a lot of seed and berry resources out there, so they'll stay longer.
Which is not always good, because then they can get hit by a big storm coming
Right.
in, so that's one of the concerns.
Right.
Plus, the food source may not be there the whole time,
Right.
so.
We had another question on the early arrivals and if that was normal. It seems like you touched on that.
Yeah, everything's at least 3 weeks early this year that I've seen. We had a red-winged blackbird at Blake during our owl prowl in February.
Hmm.
And I was disoriented because I don't usually see them that,
Yeah.
and they're up in the
Yep.
tree, I'm like, what is that bird? And I'm like, oh, it's a red-winged blackbird in February. So yeah, it's really, this year is really strange.
And with the red wings, the males typically come back first, and they're looking for the habitat to nest in, and then the females come later. So,
And less of a question, but just a comment for our panelists who aren't looking at the chat. Someone put in the chat that they have an old stump they're going to get rid of, and then they didn't have the heart to do so, and a pileated woodpecker made it his favorite snack spot.
Awesome.
oh, great.
Yay for you to see it too.
Another question, not very bird related, but what area would be the best area for viewing snowshoe hare? Maybe you have some insight.
Winona comes to mind.
Winona, yeah.
Winona State Forest, more forested areas that get high,
Cross-country skiing,
yeah,
you have to be cross-country skiing probably, right, to get in.
yeah, to get good snow,
The-
good
the-
snowpack.
Yeah, the problem with Tug Hill sometimes is access, because the heavy snows, it's hard to get to some of the areas, but
Yeah,
there's
And-
a lot of snowmobiles and a lot of,
Yeah.
cross-country skiing.
and public access is challenging on Tug Hill sometimes too. There is a lot of state land, but really, as far as protected lands, not all public, it's about 18% of the land cover. So the rest of Tug Hill is privately owned and privately managed and controlled. And so, you really need to, stick to the state forest and state wildlife management areas, and lands that are open to public access. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where for snowshoe hare
I
specifically,
was
but
just thinking of Little John too, might
Yeah.
be another good
Yeah.
spot, but you can also reach out to your DEC biologist in the region. There should be a fur bearer biologist per region, and they can help you depending on, where you want to go, so. Little John is actually part in Region 6 and part in Region 7. Region 7 headquarters is Cortland, and Region 6 is Watertown, so kind of share some of the territory there.
Mhm.
But some of that young forest is definitely, there's a lot of cuts going on down in Region 7.
Another good one here. Lewis County promotes ATV/UTV trails heavily versus hiking or biking. Doesn't the use of motorized recreational vehicles have a negative impact on birds and their habitats?
I'm gonna say.
Personally, I think it can, but.
You
can also pass.
No, I don't need to pass.
I
I mean,
mean, no.
now that I don't work for DC, no. It's, obviously they do, that's actually happening too when the birds are not here for most of them. You do have some birds that may be
Right.
here in the winter, but most of them are not here. The impact a lot of time is actually on the habitat or the grounds, like they rutting things up and they making them muddy and crashing into bushes or whatever. So, for a lot of times, especially for lands and forests and stuff, you have to also manage for recreation.
Mhm.
It's state-owned property. You have to manage for both the people and for the natural resources.
Mhm.
And that's why wildlife management areas, number one priority is the natural resource, and you are not allowed to snowmobile on WMA.
Right, yeah. I mean, in addition to some fragmentation from roadways and disturbance of habitat by vehicles and roads, the noise also has an impact on birds. So it's been shown over time that our world is becoming noisier, and birds' songs have changed. They've had to get louder. They've had to adapt those calls so that they can hear each other better. So those things do affect birds and other wildlife. Yeah.
Another person commented, they said they don't mow their lawn as much at the end, and at the end of season, they mow it high and they've noticed more insect and bird activity.
Mhm.
Perfect. That's exactly what you wanted to do.
Thank you very much. Yes, it helps them a lot.
So when we did the grassland bird management habitat, had a lot of contracts with the local farmers on these big acres, and they were not allowed to mow till after August 15th. So late mowing, so the quality of the hay wasn't good, so it was mostly mushroom hay, but they got it for a good price, and that way they got the hay at a decent price, but we also got the habitat we need for the grassland bird species.
That's very interesting. This person says, I have bobolinks on my property. Should I record this to someone, as I read they're losing nesting areas?
Yes, please.
So bobolinks are one of your common grassland bird species. There may, depending on your acreage, you may have other things out there that you don't even know are there. So Henslow sparrows, they're so quiet when they sing, and there's not a lot of them. You know, maybe go out there too and play Merlin and see if you pick up on anything else. But bobolinks are a pretty cool bird, I think.
They really are.
And they are an indicator of good grassland bird habitat. So you may have other things out there. The meadowlark is another one. You won't get a ton of them, but you may get a pair or two on a good piece of acreage. So keep your eye open for them. That's another great species in the grasslands.
Yeah. Those of you who do not have bobolinks around you too, Tug Hill Land Trust is managing a property on Mohawk Hill between Constableville and Ava, or West Leiden, I should say, along Route 26. It's just on Cronizer Road, just off of Route 26 there. And that is a restored sheet wetland site that Ducks Unlimited has restored and is helping us manage for those species. We've done some tree planting there, and there are bobolinks everywhere on that property. So they're so fun to hear and so wonderful to experience. So if you get a chance, if you need more information, you can contact me or check out our website.
So the person with the bobolink too, I don't know if you are on eBird, but if you are, use that app, that'd be a great place to record it, or actually go into the Breeding Bird Atlas portal and record it.
Hint, hint.
Yeah, it's just the same eBird, it's just that you gotta look for the portal and we'll say New York State Breeding Bird Atlas.
And possibly our last question, thoughts on no mow May movement. How late can we push off mowing to help local wildlife?
And I'm gonna guess that really has to do with the weather, honestly. I don't mow for quite a while, but people do mostly for visual, not really because they need to. Yeah, if you can not mow in May. I mean, again, birds start coming back typically in May, depending on your species. And they start nesting June and July. So if it's grassland, you really have to hold off, like I'm talking big acres, but around the house and stuff, you know, if you can wait more into June, that's probably better, but.
Yeah. For more urban yards and more settled places, letting those insects get out of those plants. So not clearing your gardens and not mowing and raking everything up before it's been, 50 degrees or above for a good at least 2 weeks.
Temperature.
To let the insects that are hiding in there that feed the birds be able to get out and about. That's very helpful as well. If you can go longer, that's even better.
And try to plant some of the coneflowers.
Some of these species.
Yeah, they'll come up and they're beautiful, and you don't have to worry about mowing at all.
Yeah.
Put them along the edges. That's what I try to do.
a lot of these species that are on the slide here either self-seed or they're perennials, so they don't take a lot of care. And they're pretty, so they're nice in a yard or a garden, and they're very helpful to insects and birds.
All right, I think that's it. Again, thank you all for coming, especially thank you to both of our speakers, the Tug Hill Commission. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you all learned a lot tonight. Again, we're going to follow up with all of the links that you saw in the chat. We will send along the recording for you to view and also the presentation so you can review any of this information. And keep an eye out for the registration link for the next and final webinar. Even if you can't attend, sign up for it and you'll get the notification and get the recording afterwards. And I believe that's about it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Gabriel. Thank you, everybody.